Racist. Doctor was shocked to see what was between his patient's legs. Dr. Charles Whitman was a seasoned physician in an upscale California practice, known for his sharp intellect and spotless reputation. Behind closed doors, however, Dr. Whitman held biases that he never revealed to his colleagues or patients. Despite the diversity of California, he quietly prided himself on seeing the world in a certain, narrow way. His patients never suspected anything amiss. He was meticulous, efficient, and exceptionally skilled. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below. One late afternoon, Dr. Whitman was reviewing patient files in his office when his receptionist buzzed in. "Doctor, your next patient is here. A walk-in. She seems a bit unconventional." Curious and slightly annoyed at the interruption to his carefully structured day, Dr. Whitman looked at the clock. He was nearing the end of his shift, and an unscheduled appointment was the last thing he wanted. Still, he cleared his throat and adjusted his white coat. "Send her in," he replied. The door opened, and in walked a striking woman named Mia. She had radiant dark skin, a cascade of curly hair, and an air of quiet confidence that filled the room. She wore loose, comfortable clothing, an array of silver rings on her fingers, and a tattoo of a lotus flower on her wrist. Dr. Whitman's eyes flickered with surprise as he took in her appearance, but he quickly masked it behind his professional facade. "Hello, Ms." he prompted, glancing at her intake form. "Mia Williams," she replied, her voice calm. She noticed his lingering glance but seemed unfazed. "Right. Well, what seems to be the issue today, Miss Williams?" He pulled out his pen, barely meeting her gaze as he prepared to jot down her symptoms. It was a habit of his: get to the point, diagnose, move on. Mia paused, looking directly at him, and then explained, "I've been having some severe pain in my lower abdomen. It's been going on for a while, but lately it's become unbearable." Dr. Whitman nodded, still distractedly reviewing her file. He made a few notes, asking her routine questions, though his tone was clinical, almost detached. "How long have you been experiencing these symptoms?" he asked, sounding impatient. "Several months," she replied, her calmness contrasting with his brusque approach. "But there's more." Dr. Whitman barely looked up, assuming it would be another minor detail to add to her chart. "Go on," he murmured. Mia took a breath, her eyes steady. "I was born intersex," she said quietly, watching him closely. The words hung in the air, and Dr. Whitman finally looked up, his expression shifting from mild indifference to surprise, and then to a flash of discomfort he couldn't hide. He hadn't expected this. She could see it in his face, a combination of confusion and an ill-disguised judgment. "Intersex?" he repeated, his voice betraying a slight tremor. It wasn't a term he often encountered, certainly not in his daily practice. He wasn't prepared, and for the first time in years he felt unbalanced. "Yes," Mia continued, watching him carefully. "I have both male and female biological characteristics. I was assigned female at birth, but my anatomy doesn't conform to typical standards." The doctor's mind raced as he processed her words, grappling with how to approach this revelation. Despite his extensive medical training, he found himself at a loss, battling his own biases and discomfort. He cleared his throat, attempting to mask his unease. "I see. I'll need to examine you," he said, regaining his composure, though his voice held an unsteady edge. Mia nodded, sensing the struggle beneath his calm exterior but remaining resolute. She had encountered reactions like his before, people hiding their confusion or discomfort behind a veneer of professionalism. She was used to it, yet she refused to let anyone, especially a doctor, make her feel less than she was. As Dr. Whitman conducted the examination, he couldn't help but be taken aback by the intricacies of her unique anatomy. It was unlike anything he had expected, challenging everything he thought he understood about gender and biology. For the first time in his career, he felt humbled by the complexity of the human body and by Mia's quiet resilience. Throughout the examination, Mia maintained her dignity, observing him closely, reading the slight hesitations in his movements. She knew he was struggling to reconcile his assumptions, yet she said nothing, allowing him to come to terms with his own discomfort. When he finished, Dr. Whitman straightened up, his face a blend of awe and respect. He cleared his throat, looking at Mia directly. "Thank you, Miss Williams," he said, his tone softening, the formality giving way to something genuine. "I appreciate your patience with me." Mia's lips curved into a slight smile, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "Thank you, doctor," she replied. "I just hope that one day people won't need patience just to be seen as they are." Dr. Whitman nodded, unable to look away from her. He realized in that moment that he had been given an unexpected gift, the chance to confront his own biases and assumptions, to recognize the narrowness of his perspective. And he understood that Mia was not merely a patient, but a teacher of sorts, challenging him to expand his understanding of humanity. When she left his office, Dr. Whitman sat for a long while reflecting on the encounter. He knew he would never be the same, that he had been offered a chance to grow in ways he hadn't anticipated, and he was grateful for it, though he knew the journey would be uncomfortable. But it was a discomfort he was finally willing to embrace. From that day forward, Dr. Whitman carried the memory of Mia with him, a silent reminder that beneath the surface, every person held depths and intricacies beyond what could be seen or understood at a glance. He would never forget the lesson she had taught him, that humanity defies simple categories, and that true understanding requires humility, patience, and an open heart. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Whitman found himself deeply changed by his encounter with Mia. Her calm courage and willingness to share her truth had challenged him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He began to see his work and his patients with fresh eyes, noticing nuances he had once overlooked, and his interactions took on a new tone of empathy and openness. He decided to take it further. Dr. Whitman began attending workshops on diversity and inclusion, seeking to broaden his understanding of gender, sexuality, and the lived experiences of those different from him. He even connected with a few doctors specializing in LGBTQIA+ healthcare, determined to educate himself on the ways medical practice could be more inclusive. These workshops brought to light the stories of individuals who had been misdiagnosed or even ignored due to biases and assumptions, reminding him of the weight and responsibility his profession carried. Driven by this new awareness, Dr. Whitman approached the hospital board with an idea that surprised even himself. He proposed launching a dedicated clinic within the hospital that offered specialized, inclusive care for intersex and transgender patients. The clinic would aim to provide comprehensive, compassionate health care, staffed by doctors and nurses trained in treating diverse bodies and identities with dignity. At first, the board was skeptical. The medical establishment, with all its traditions and entrenched practices, rarely embraced such radical shifts. But Dr. Whitman's commitment and newfound passion for equitable healthcare were undeniable. After weeks of planning and presentations, his proposal was accepted, and he was given the green light to establish the clinic, a first of its kind in the area. The opening of the clinic was quiet but meaningful. Word spread gradually, and soon, patients from all over California began arriving, finding solace and safety in a medical space finally attuned to their unique needs. Dr. Whitman felt an unexpected pride each time he walked through the doors, seeing how one encounter had transformed not only his practice, but the lives of so many others. One day, as he was finishing up rounds, a familiar face appeared in the waiting area. It was Mia. She had heard about the new clinic and wanted to see it for herself, curious and cautiously optimistic. Dr. Whitman's eyes met hers, and he immediately walked over, smiling with a warmth he hadn't shown her before. "Mia," he said, his voice carrying a hint of gratitude. "I'm glad you came." She looked around the clinic, taking in the open, welcoming space and the diverse staff, then turned back to him with a nod. "I wanted to see what you've done here," she said, her voice steady but carrying a touch of awe. "It's impressive." Dr. Whitman hesitated for a moment, humbled and deeply grateful. "This clinic wouldn't exist if it weren't for you," he admitted. "You showed me what I couldn't see in myself, the assumptions I was carrying. I owe you so much for that." Mia regarded him thoughtfully, a small smile playing at her lips. "I'm glad you listened," she replied, her words soft but firm. "Not everyone does." There was a quiet understanding between them as they spoke, an acknowledgement of the profound impact one moment could have. In that brief encounter months ago, neither of them could have anticipated the chain reaction it would set off. But here they were, standing in the reality of it. As Mia left the clinic that day, Dr. Whitman watched her go, feeling both a sense of closure and a new beginning. He understood now that his journey of growth and understanding was ongoing, that every patient, every story, was a chance to deepen his compassion and expand his perspective. And so, Dr. Whitman continued his work, transformed by a lesson he had once resisted, but had now embraced wholeheartedly. That medicine, at its core, is not just about treating bodies, but about honoring lives, with all their diversity and complexity. It was a lesson he would carry forward, one that would shape his practice and his purpose for years to come. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this story. It doesn't cost you anything and you'll make me very happy. Thank you, and I look forward to your like.